No one in that weathered old saloon knew they were sitting next to a nightmare that had once haunted the entire West. It was a choking June evening, where trail dust and cigar smoke mixed together into a low brown haze. In the corner of the room, a stranger of an old man, dried out like desert wood, was quietly tasting cheap whiskey with a patience that felt unnatural. He did not answer the taunts thrown at him. He did not look around. He just sat there, still as a boulder in a high wind. His silence was not weakness. It was cold like steel, heavy like stone, and full of slow, coiled threat. Dust Creek in the year 1884 lived in fear of a single name, Baron Red. He ruled the whole region like a bloodless lord. He controlled every barrel of liquor, every card game, and every coin in the pockets of the townspeople. Wherever he walked, laughter died, eyes dropped, and fear followed him like a shadow that would not let go. But tonight, that habit broke. At the corner table, that silver-haired man was still sitting there, quiet, as if he did not know he had just walked into a wolf den. Baron Red noticed him and let a slow grin curl across his mouth. He walked over, yanked the bottle out of the old man's hand, and tipped it upside down over his head, whiskey rolling down the man's dusty grey coat. "Welcome to hell, old man," Red rasped. "I am the law here." The whole saloon burst into laughter, but the old man, Silas Harlow, 68 years old, with calloused hands and white hair that flashed under the oil lamp, still said nothing. He only stared at his empty glass, his eyes so flat and calm that it made the air go cold. That silence slowly ate all the noise in the room. One of Red's men shivered and muttered, "Boss, his eyes, they are not right." Baron Red shoved the table aside and sent the glasses crashing across the floor. In that moment, Silas lifted his head, slow and deliberate. His gaze cut through the hanging smoke, black and cold like a moonless night. It was the gaze of someone who had been to hell and then decided to walk back out and keep living. But before you find out how an old man pushing 80 years old, with hands that shook from bad joints and eyes blurred by time, turned a simple poker game into a gunfight that made the whole West tremble, take 1 second to press. Like, subscribe, and tell me where you are listening from. Are you in Texas, in Nevada, or out in the desert wind of Arizona? I truly want to know. Because what is about to happen in Dust Creek is not just revenge. It is a bloody lesson in honor, in violence, and in the man who wrote half the gunfighting rules of the Old West, then personally broke every one of them. In the year 1891, the town of Blackwater survived on a certain glimmer that came out of the ground. Silver. That light drove men insane, left women without husbands, and made the law mean nothing. Where there was silver, there was gambling. Where there was gambling, sooner or later, there was blood. At the far end of the main street, the Crimson Dagger Saloon sat quiet like a wound that would not close. The saloon was never truly closed. The piano and the gunshots were its heartbeat. The owner was Grant Mercer, a famous card cheat, a fox wrapped in velvet. Mercer had won that saloon in a poker game that everybody knew had been rigged, and from that day forward, he ran it with fear. Working under him were 5 outcasts from different gangs: Dutchman Bill, Snake Charlie, Red Pete, Little Joe, and the young executioner they called Viper. They did not keep order. They kept power, using gun barrels and ugly laughter. On a Tuesday evening, when the last light of the sun pushed through the filthy curtains, an old man dragged his boots through the door, Eliard Crow, his back slightly bent, his boots split at the seams, his hat caked with trail dust. He ordered a whiskey in a voice that sounded like sand across steel. The bartender did not even get to answer before Dutchman Bill growled from the poker table, "Old man, we are about to start the big game." Buy-in is $50. You got that kind of money? Crow answered by dropping a leather pouch on the bar. When it opened, 50 gold coins spilled out and rang across the counter like church metal. The whole room went silent. Mercer glanced over and raised an eyebrow. Fresh blood, he said, sweet as sugar, but coiled like a rattlesnake. Please, sit. Let us see how long your money stays alive. Eliard sat, and his bones cracked loud enough to make the table laugh. First hand, he folded. Second hand, he lost. Third hand, he bet and got cleaned out. Every time, the mockery got meaner. Grandpa, maybe you should go home and feed your chickens instead of playing with men, Red Pete snorted. Viper gave a thin smile. I have never seen anybody that stupid. Are you blind already? But none of them noticed the cloudy eyes behind those dirty glasses tracking everything. Every twitch, every scratch of the nose, every sideways glance, every tiny signal of cheating quiet as a breath. The old man sat there like the table was swallowing him. But in truth he was watching, counting, drawing a death map for every single one of them. 2 hours later, Eliard's gold was down to a small handful. Mercer leaned back with pleasure, took a slow pull on his cigar, and said, You should quit before you lose the last of your clothes. Crow looked at the chips he still had, then nudged them all toward the center. All in, he whispered. No one laughed now. Mercer squinted at him. You sure, old man? I am sure, Eliard said. Cards were dealt. Eliard looked at his hand, and his mouth tightened into a thin line. For one short instant, the air in the saloon turned thick as glue. I call, Mercer said, and shoved in another stack worth $100, unless you have something else to wager. Eliard smiled, and the smile alone made 2 men at the table feel ice in their backs. I do, he said softly. My life. Mercer's cigar slid right out of his mouth. The whole room froze. Crow placed his cards down on the table, one at a time, slow like scripture. Ace of spades, ace of hearts, ace of diamonds, ace of clubs. The entire room forgot how to breathe when all 4 aces lay in front of Eliard Crow. 1 second later, chairs scraped as Dutchman Bill jumped up, hand already dropping to his hip. Who are you? He snarled. Crow lifted his head, and his eyes flashed behind the glasses, like steel catching fire. My name is Eliard Crosswind, he said slowly. That name froze the saloon. The bartender dropped a glass. Snake Charlie whispered, but his voice would barely come out. No way. Crosswind is dead. Tombstone. 10 years ago. Mercer shot to his feet, his face drained white. Liar. I heard he was hanged in Arizona. Eliard stood up. When he straightened his back, the old man hunch disappeared. For a heartbeat, they were not looking at a worn-out drifter. They were looking at a legend. A gunfighter so feared that even hired killers used to turn around and take a different road. You boys thought I was dead? He said, voice low and clear. I just stepped off the map to go find my own kind of justice. His gaze slid to Dutch. 28 years ago, in Silver Creek, there was a ranch that burned, he said. A woman and a 10-year-old boy were trapped in that fire. The men who did it wore red, striped bandanas. Dutch backed up, his face turning grey. I do not know what you are talking about. You know, Eliard said, and his voice was iron on stone. You were riding a paint horse with a white blaze on its forehead. You were laughing while my daughter-in-law screamed for help. I still remember that sound. The air inside the Crimson Dagger turned thick and heavy. Snake Charlie slid his hand under the table, and Viper shifted his body, hunting for cover. Mercer looked around and felt the trap closing in. You are insane, Crosswind, he shouted. "You crazy old fool. We have 5 guns. You only have 1. No." Eliard quietly opened his coat, showing an old silver Colt, the barrel shining under the yellow lamplight. "5 guns?" he asked with a dry little laugh. "Good. 1 bullet for each of you." He drew the gun, and the way he did it was slow and steady, but it still made grown men feel cold in their bones. "I am 78 years old," he said. "My eyes are cloudy, my hands shake, my back hurts, but I have never once missed a man who deserved to die." Mercer squeezed his trigger. The hammer snapped, and the world exploded. In the thin slice of time between 2 heartbeats, everything detonated. Grant Mercer fired first. The gunshot cracked the air, muzzle flashlighting the smoke and screams. But Eliard Crosswind was already moving before Mercer's bullet even crossed the table. His body turned in a way that looked less like motion and more like memory, driven by the reflex of a gunfighter who had already survived more than 40 armed showdowns. Mercer's bullet punched through empty space and smoke. The silver Colt in Eliard's hand came out of its holster so fast that no one had time to understand what they were seeing. 1 sharp report, clean and final, like a judge's sentence. Mercer went over backward, a dark red hole in the center of his forehead. He died before he had time to be surprised. Almost at the same moment, Dutchman Bill and Red Pete both fired. 2 bursts of light, 2 hard bangs. But Eliard had already dropped to 1 knee, his body spinning like a dust devil. 2 return shots cracked out. Fast, cold, exact. Dutch fell like a sack. Pete took a round straight through the chest, his eyes wide with shock at how fast death had found him. Snake Charlie screamed and yanked a little derringer from under the table, firing wild in panic. His shot went wide and buried itself in the wall. Eliard only twitched his wrist. Another short blast. Charlie grabbed his own throat, blood fountaining through his fingers, and collapsed face first across the cards. Viper, the last one alive, panicked so hard he threw his chair and ran. He almost made it to the door. He almost got his hand on the brass handle when the 5th shot cracked through the saloon. Dry, final, like a coffin nail being tapped in. Viper hit the floor in the doorway, blood soaking into the dust. 5 bullets, 5 dead men, 5 seconds. When the gun smoke cleared, only silence was left. Heavy, absolute silence. The air stank of burned powder, blood, and spilled whiskey, a smell so ugly that only the Old West could understand it. Eliard was still standing there with the gun in his hand, shoulders heavy, the oil lamp throwing pale gold across his white hair like moonlight on cold steel. He walked slowly to the bar. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady in a way that made everyone's spine tighten. "Pour me a whiskey." The bartender's hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped the bottle. Eliard drank it down, set the glass on the counter, and looked at the pale faces around him. "Any of you ever work for Mercer's crew?" Total silence. A few heads shook hard. "Good," he said softly. Then he calmly picked up the same leather pouch of gold he had brought in. He walked out the door and stepped past 5 cooling bodies without a single glance backward. Outside, the night wind pushed the gun smoke up into the deep purple sky. Somewhere behind him, somebody whispered, "Dear God." Eliard only answered in a tired desert growl. Not God, just an old man who waited 30 years to get some rest. The story of the gunfight spread faster than the desert wind. By the next morning, all of Montana was buzzing about the old man who fired 5 shots in 5 seconds. People gave him all kinds of names. The Ghost of Dust Creek, the Man Who Never Missed, the Last Gunfighter of the Age. 3 days later, Marshal Ben Stone rode into Blackwater. Stone was a lawman, calm and decent, but he had once lived in Arizona, where the name Eliard Crosswind had been printed on every wanted poster. Stone found the old man sitting on the porch of an old boarding house, holding a cup of coffee and watching the sun come up. When the marshal pulled his horse to a stop, Eliard spoke first. "I knew you would come," Stone said. "There are 5 bodies in the morgue. You got anything you want to say?" "Self-defense," Eliard answered, steady as a rock. 20 witnesses. Mercer fired first. Stone climbed the steps and sat down beside him without looking him in the face. It was the kind of respect that existed between 2 men who had both carried guns long enough to understand what that meant. "Word is you hunted those men," Stone said. "If that is true, then this was planned killing." Crosswind gave a worn-out smile. "No, Marshal. This was justice, 30 years late." The 2 of them sat in quiet for a long time, only the sound of the wind pushing through old boards. Finally Stone stood, adjusted his hat, and said, "The witnesses back you. Mercer was wanted in 2 territories. When you get down to it, you just made Montana a little cleaner." He turned his horse, but before he rode off, he paused. "Eliard, our time is ending. You should learn how to let go." Eliard watched him disappear down the dusty street and said softly, "When I figure out how to die, Marshal, I will." Eliard Crosswind stayed in Blackwater for 3 more months, not because he wanted to, because the town needed him. After Grant Mercer and his crew dropped, Blackwater became hollow. No law, no leader, just the smell of gun smoke hanging in the wind. Drifters started coming in, hoping to claim the empty power. But every single time they rode into town, that old man was already on the porch, holding a cup of coffee, watching them with quiet eyes, like he had been waiting on them from a mile away. They came 3 times. 3 times, not a single pistol cleared leather. Rumour spread fast. The ghost of Crosswind is still in Blackwater, and he does not show mercy. The town council begged him to take the marshal's badge. He only shook his head. "I just want peace." Even so, his presence alone was enough to let the whole town sleep at night. Children would sit around him and listen to his stories. And the stories were not about blood anymore. They were about honor and about keeping your word. Grown men brought him hot food. The bartender quietly left good whiskey at his door. No one asked about his past, because everybody understood that some memories should be left alone. One November morning, they found Eliard sitting the same way as always, coffee cup still warm in his hand, his silver Colt wiped clean and resting in its holster. He was no longer breathing, but his face was calm in a way that felt almost like relief. The entire town walked him to the cemetery and set a plain white stone for him. E. Crosswind, 1813, 1891. The ghost of Dust Creek. He never missed. People thought the story ended there. But a few years later, when a gang tried to rob the Blackwater Bank, 6 men went down, each with 1 perfect bullet in him. A witness swore they saw an old man in a pale coat walking through the gunsmoke before vanishing into thin air. After that, folk started saying that on quiet nights, if you listen close, you can still hear distant gunfire rolling down from the hills. A reminder that Crosswind never really left. Legends do not die. They just change shape and keep walking in the wind. Now picture this. You are sitting in a little roadside saloon. There is an old man with silver hair across from you, quiet over a glass of whiskey. Would you realize that he used to be the kind of gunfighter that made the whole West bow its head? Or would you laugh him off as a harmless old-timer until it was already too late? Tell me what you think in the comments. Remember this, age has never been the same thing as safety. Some young men are reckless because they think they cannot die, but some men lived long enough to turn death itself into an art. Crosswind was one of those men. If this story sent a chill down your back, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next stories from the Wild West, where justice comes out of a gun barrel and legends are written in blood and smoke. Now it is your turn. Do you believe Eliard Crosswind is still out there, watching over Blackwater in the night wind? If you believe he is real, comment, Ghost Rides. If you think it is only a legend, comment, just a story. I will read every single one. And share this video with anyone who loves Western stories, because who knows, maybe they will hear the gunshots echoing out there too.